She just showed up. Not in person, not yet. First, it was a LinkedIn message. 2 years after she'd vanished from my life, years after I'd been diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, Chloe was back. She'd heard I was doing well. She was so happy for me. She'd always known I was strong enough to beat it. The exclamation point at the end of that sentence felt like a slap in the face. It made my stomach clench. An hour later, another message. I know it's been a long time, but I'd really love to reconnect. I've done a lot of growing, and I think you'd be proud of the person I've become. I just stared at those words on my screen, sitting in my thriving Austin office, a man completely remade, trying to figure out what I felt. And the answer, honestly, was nothing. Just a cold, detached curiosity. But to understand why that message hit me so hard, and why I reacted the way I did later, we have to go back. Way back. I met Chloe when I was 24, fresh out of college, diving into my role as a growth strategist for a tech startup in Austin. She was 23, in social media marketing, and we crossed paths at one of those painfully awkward networking events nobody actually wants to attend. Chloe had this undeniable energy, like she was always performing for an invisible audience, constantly thinking about how every moment would look in a story later. I was the opposite. I was spreadsheets and projections, a quiet confidence built on actually creating things. We clicked, or at least I thought we did. That first night, she snapped a photo of us and posted it with some caption about unexpected connections. I remember thinking it was a bit much, but also kind of charming. Within 3 months, we were living together in my place in South Congress. 6 months in, she was talking about marriage, kids, the whole package. Looking back, we were speaking entirely different languages. When Chloe talked about our future, she was picturing an aesthetic, a curated narrative of us that looked good. When I talked about our future, I was talking about retirement accounts, whose career would take priority, and what we'd do if one of us got sick. I actually brought up that last part once, the getting sick bit, and she just laughed. We're too young to think about stuff like that, Noah, she said. I didn't push it. I was 25, healthy, and stupid enough to believe planning for disaster was the same as preventing it. The diagnosis came on a regular afternoon in October. I'd been tired for weeks, losing weight, had this persistent cough. Tests led to more tests, and then suddenly I was in an oncologist's office, hearing non-Hodgkin lymphoma, stage 3, aggressive, chemotherapy. I just sat there, nodding, like I understood, but all I could think about was Chloe. How was I going to tell her? How was this going to change everything? I called her from the parking lot. She came immediately. When I told her, she cried harder than I did. She held my face in her hands. We're going to fight this together, she promised. I'm not going anywhere. And I believed her. Every single word. The first few weeks, she was incredible. She came to every appointment, took notes when I was too overwhelmed. She researched diets, supplements, anything. And she posted about it. Not in a gross way, exactly, but in that performative support way. Articles about cancer survival rates with captions like "staying strong." Her friends would flood the comments with heart emojis and prayers, and she'd respond to everyone. I didn't love the public nature of my illness, but I told myself she was processing it in her own way, that she needed that online support system. What I didn't realize then was that she was building a narrative where she was the devoted girlfriend, standing by her sick boyfriend. And narratives like that only work if there's an audience watching. Chemotherapy started in November. It was exactly as horrible as everyone says, the nausea, the exhaustion, food tasting like metal, my hair falling out in clumps. But worse than all that was watching Chloe slowly disappear. Not physically at first. She still came to the hospital, still sat in the chair next to my bed. But mentally, she was gone. She'd scroll through her phone during infusions. When I tried to talk to her about how scared I was, she'd say, "I know, baby. Me, too." But it was distant, like she was reading lines from a script. The social media posts about my illness stopped around week 3 of treatment. When I asked her about it, she said, "I just need some privacy right now. This is really hard for me." I didn't know how to tell her it was harder for me without sounding selfish. By December, she was making it to maybe half my appointments. There was always a reason. Work was busy. She wasn't feeling well. She needed to take care of her mental health. That last one bothered me the most. What was I supposed to say? That her mental health was less important than my literal cancer? I wasn't that person. So, I just said I understood and tried not to think about how I was facing the scariest thing in my life essentially alone. My parents were across the country and could only visit once a month. My brother was deployed. It was supposed to be Chloe and me against this thing. Instead, it was just me. The breaking point came in early January, at a coffee shop near my apartment. I'd just finished my worst round of chemo yet. I could barely keep water down. Chloe had asked to meet. I knew what was coming before she said anything. I could see it in the way she wouldn't look at me, in the way she was already crying. "I can't do this anymore, Noah. I just can't." I asked her what she meant, even though I knew. She said she wasn't ready to be a caregiver, that she was too young to spend her life in hospitals, that she deserved to actually live instead of watching someone die. That last part, the casual certainty that I was dying, like it was already decided, that's what hit me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there and let her say everything she needed to say. I think she wanted me to fight, to beg her to stay. When I didn't, she looked almost offended. "Say something," she said. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." And that was it. She blocked my number that night. Blocked me on every social media platform. Blocked my family when my mom tried to reach out. It was like I had died already, and she was just moving on. I found out later, through a mutual friend, that she'd posted something about choosing herself and setting boundaries and healing from toxic relationships. People were supporting her like she was the victim. I was alone in my apartment, bald and nauseous, genuinely unsure if I'd survive the next 6 months. And she was getting praised for her bravery in leaving. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here's what I realized during those months, when I was at my absolute lowest and there was nobody there to witness it. Chloe didn't leave because I was sick. She left because I became a risk. As long as I was healthy, successful, building a good life, I was worth the investment. The moment I became uncertain, the moment loving me required actual sacrifice instead of just Instagram captions, I stopped being worth it. She wasn't a monster. She was just someone who loved the idea of me more than she loved the reality of me. And when those two things stopped matching up, she chose herself. Part of me doesn't even blame her for that. But here's the thing nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's actually pretty stable. Once you're there, once you've lost everything you thought mattered, you stop living for other people's approval. You start living because you're still breathing, and you might as well do something with that. I was lying in a hospital bed in February, alone except for the nurses and doctors, and I made a decision. If I was going to die, I was going to die building something that mattered. And if I was going to live, I was going to live for someone who chose me without guarantees. The doctors gave me a 30% chance of survival. I spent the first month after Chloe left wondering if I even wanted to beat those odds. That's the part nobody talks about with cancer. It's not just your body fighting. It's your mind deciding whether the fight is worth it. And when you're alone at 3 a.m, throwing up into a hospital toilet, the answer isn't always obvious. But somewhere around late February, something shifted. I was in my hospital bed after a particularly brutal chemo session. I opened my laptop and looked at the business plan I'd been working on before the diagnosis, a growth strategy framework for scaling startups in competitive markets. I'd shown it to Chloe once, she'd said it was cool, but asked when it would make real money. I'd shelved it. Now, I had nothing but time. If I was going to die anyway, I figured I might as well die working on something that mattered to me. I started rebuilding it from my hospital bed, reaching out to former clients, offering consulting sessions for cheap, just to keep my mind occupied. The work was slow. Some days, I couldn't get out of bed. Some days, the brain fog from treatment was so bad I couldn't form coherent sentences. But I kept at it. My doctor said keeping busy might help. That patients with purpose tend to respond better to treatment. I didn't know if that was real science or just something he told dying people to keep them motivated, but I didn't care. By March, I had 3 clients. By April, 7. By May, I realized I was building something that could actually scale. The irony wasn't lost on me, I was planning a future I might not live to see. But that's what hope looks like when you're dying. It's working anyway. That's when I met Harper. She was one of the oncology nurses on my floor, late 20s, with this completely no-nonsense attitude I appreciated after months of people tiptoeing around me like I was already a corpse. She didn't do the sad voice thing. Didn't treat me like I was fragile. She just came in, did her job, and occasionally told me to stop being dramatic when I complained about the nausea. The first real conversation we had was in June. She caught me working on my laptop at 2 in the morning and asked what I was doing awake. I told her I'd rest when I was dead. She made some comment about how, at this rate, that would be sooner than I thought. I actually laughed for the first time in months. She sat down, asked what I was working on. I explained the whole framework, expecting her to get bored or give me some platitude about staying positive. Instead, she asked really specific questions about market positioning and customer acquisition that showed she was actually listening. After that, she'd stop by during her breaks and we'd talk. Not about cancer. Not about my chances. Just normal stuff. She told me about her nightmare roommate who kept adopting cats, about her family in Denver, about how she'd wanted to be a pediatric nurse but couldn't handle seeing sick kids, so she chose oncology instead. At least adults understood what was happening to them. I told her about my work, about Austin, about everything except Chloe, because what was there to say? Those conversations became routine. Whenever Harper was on shift, she'd find 20 minutes to just sit and be normal with me. I started looking forward to it more than I wanted to admit. She never asked about my personal life, never pushed. There was something incredibly freeing about being around someone who only knew sick me, who didn't have the before version to compare me to. The remission news came in August, almost 10 months after my diagnosis. My oncologist said the tumors had shrunk significantly, that the treatment was working better than expected, that I needed to continue monitoring, but I was officially in remission. I called my parents first, they cried. I called my brother, he said he'd visit as soon as his leave came through. Then I just sat in my apartment alone, trying to process that I was actually going to live. Harper stopped by later that evening. She wasn't even on shift, but she'd heard the news. She brought Thai food and made some joke about how I couldn't use the death excuse to get out of things anymore. We ate on my couch. We didn't talk about the fact that I'd survived. We just existed in that moment. And I remember thinking this was what contentment felt like. Not excitement or relief, just quiet gratitude for being alive and having someone who cared without needing anything from me. My business took off after that. Turns out having a near-death experience makes you really good at prioritizing what matters in business strategy. Clients started seeking me out specifically because of my approach. The growth happened faster than I expected. By November, I'd hired 2 contractors. By January of the following year, I'd moved into a small office space in downtown Austin. By March, I was making more money than I'd ever made at my old startup job. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, successful, building something real. Harper and I started seeing each other outside the hospital sometime around October. Nothing official, just coffee or dinner when her shifts allowed. It felt easy, in a way relationships never had before. She never asked about future plans, never pushed for labels or timelines. She just showed up and let things develop naturally. I told her once that I appreciated how low pressure everything felt with her. And she said something about how she'd seen me when I thought I was dying, so everything after that was just bonus. That hit me harder than it should have. The casual way she acknowledged she'd chosen me when there was no guarantee of a future, when loving me was actually a risk. And that's when Chloe came back into my life. Over 2 years. Since she'd left, that LinkedIn message arrived. She followed up, saying she'd been following my company's growth, how she'd always believed in my potential, how she'd thought about me often over the past 2 years. That last one made me angry in a way the rest didn't. Because if she'd thought about me so often, she could have unblocked me at any point during the months when I actually needed someone. She could have checked in when I was bald and vomiting and uncertain. But she only came back when checking in was safe, when I was successful again, when loving me was convenient. I showed the messages to Harper one night. She read them without saying anything, then handed my phone back. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Not what should I do, not her opinion, just what I wanted. I said I didn't know yet. She told me to figure it out, but not to let Chloe make me forget who was actually there when it mattered. Then she went back to reading her book, like we'd just been discussing what to order for dinner. Chloe eventually asked to meet in person. Said she wanted closure, or to explain herself, or something. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at the same coffee shop where she'd broken up with me. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked the same physically, but there was this desperate energy about her that hadn't been there before, like she was trying too hard to seem casual. She ordered some complicated drink, sat down, and immediately started talking about how mature she was now. How she'd been in therapy. How she understood she'd handled things badly, but she'd been young and scared. She talked for almost 20 minutes about her journey of self-discovery, about the work she'd done on herself, about how she'd realized what really mattered in life. Then she said it. The sentence that told me everything. If I'd known you were going to survive, that things would turn out okay, maybe I would have made different choices. She hadn't come back because she'd realized she loved me. She'd come back because I'd become a safe bet again. Because the risk had passed. And suddenly, I was worth the investment again. I let her keep talking, let her explain and justify and rationalize. When she finally stopped and looked at me expectantly, I realized she thought this was working, that I was going to take her back. She reached across the table for my hand. I never stopped caring about you, Noah. I just needed time to become someone strong enough to handle hard things. I pulled my hand back. You needed time, or you needed me to stop being a hard thing? She didn't have an answer for that. I stood up and told her I appreciated her honesty, but I'd moved on. She actually looked shocked, like it hadn't occurred to her that I might not want her back. As I walked out, I heard her ask if there was someone else. I didn't answer. It wasn't about Harper. It was about the fact that Chloe had shown me exactly who she was when things got difficult, and I decided to believe her. I called Harper from my car and told her about the meeting. She asked how I felt. Free, I said. Like I'd finally closed a chapter one didn't even realize was still open. She told me she'd just adopted another cat and her roommate was going to kill her, so she might need a place to crash. I laughed. Come over. That night, sitting on my couch with Harper and her newest rescue cat, I realized this was what I'd survived for. Not the success, or the money, or the vindication. But the quiet, simple joy of being chosen by someone who'd seen me at my worst and stayed anyway. Harper moved in 3 weeks after that coffee shop meeting with Chloe. Not because of some grand romantic gesture, but because her roommate actually did kick her out over the cat situation, and my apartment was bigger anyway. It felt natural, the way good things do when they're not forced. I remember thinking how different this was from living with Chloe. There was no performance to it. No checking in before posting photos. No narrative we were trying to sell to the world. Harper just existed in my space like she'd always been there, leaving her nursing scrubs on the bathroom floor, stealing my coffee in the mornings. And it was mundane and perfect in a way I hadn't known relationships could be. Chloe didn't stop trying after that first meeting. She started texting from a new number I didn't have blocked. Always late at night, always when she was probably drinking and feeling nostalgic for a version of us that never actually existed. The messages were long and rambling. She'd made a mistake. She'd been too immature. If I'd just give her another chance, she could prove she was different now. She sent articles about forgiveness and second chances, quoted some podcast about how people deserve grace for their worst moments. She'd been seeing a therapist who helped her understand she'd been dealing with her own trauma when she left. I didn't respond to any of it, but I didn't block the number either. Part of me needed to see how far she'd go. Needed confirmation that my read of the situation was correct. The messages escalated. Over the next few weeks, she started showing up places she thought I might be. The coffee shop near my office. The gym I'd rejoined after getting cleared by my doctor. Even the Thai restaurant where Harper and I got takeout sometimes. It never felt threatening, exactly. More pathetic than anything. Like she was trying to manufacture a chance encounter that would make me realize what I was missing. Once, she actually waited outside my office building and tried to talk to me as I was leaving. She started going on about how she'd been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our history, about everything we'd built together before things went wrong. I stopped her. We hadn't built anything together, I told her. You were an observer to my life, not a participant. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. She said something about how she'd loved me. You loved the version of me that was convenient for you, I said. Then I walked away before she could respond. Harper noticed I was distracted. She asked if everything was okay. I showed her the messages. She read through them with this increasingly annoyed expression and finally asked if I wanted her to talk to Chloe. Sometimes it takes hearing it from another woman for the message to sink in, she said. Maybe if Chloe understood you'd actually moved on, she'd stop living in this fantasy where we were going to get back together. I told her I didn't want her involved in my mess. She just looked at me. My mess is her mess now, she said. That's kind of how relationships work. So, I gave her Chloe's number, and honestly, I didn't think much would come of it. Harper called Chloe the next day while I was at work. I don't know exactly what was said, because Harper refused to give me details. She just had this satisfied expression that made me nervous and a little proud at the same time. But whatever she said worked, because the messages from Chloe stopped completely for about 3 days. Then I got one final text, longer than all the others combined. This whole thing about how she couldn't believe I'd chosen someone who didn't know the real me, who hadn't been there for the good times, who was essentially a stranger compared to our shared history. She wrote, she only knows sick you, broken you. She doesn't know who you were before all this. And I realized that was exactly the point. Harper knew me without the mythology, without the comparison to who I used to be or who I might become. She'd met me at my absolute worst and decided I was enough exactly as I was. And that was worth more than any shared history or nostalgia for better times. I wrote back my first response in weeks, you're right. She doesn't know who I was before. But unlike you, she didn't need that version of me to decide I was worth staying for. I blocked the number after sending it. I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just relief that this chapter was finally, truly closed. The final confrontation came in June, almost 3 months after that first coffee shop meeting. Harper and I were at a networking event for my company, and Chloe showed up. I still don't know how she found out. Maybe she'd been following my company's social media, or heard through mutual connections we still had in Austin's tech scene. But she walked in wearing this dress that was clearly expensive, clearly chosen to remind me of what I was missing. She didn't approach me immediately, just sort of hovered near the bar, watching me. I could feel Harper tense up next to me when she realized who it was. Chloe finally came over when Harper went to the restroom. She had this weird smile, like we were old friends running into each other unexpectedly. She said she'd seen my company was doing well, that she wasn't surprised because she'd always known I had potential. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to get to the point. She started talking about how she'd made a mistake and thought I knew that. Implied that was why I couldn't fully move on. I told her I had fully moved on, that I was happy. She actually laughed, like I'd said something funny. "You're settling for someone who saw you at your weakest," she said. "Don't you see how that's just fear? You're afraid of being with someone who expects you to be great." And that's when I realized she genuinely believed this. That in her mind, she was the victim. That I was making a mistake by choosing stability over whatever chaotic energy she thought passed for passion. Harper came back before I could respond. She looked at Chloe for a long moment before introducing herself in this bright, cheerful voice that somehow made everything more uncomfortable. She said how she'd heard so much about Chloe, how it must be difficult seeing me doing well without her, how she hoped Chloe found whatever it was she was looking for. There was nothing overtly mean about what Harper said. But the subtext was clear. Chloe just stood there, looking between us, before saying something about how we didn't know what she and I had together. Then she walked away. We watched her leave. Harper turned to me and asked if she'd overstepped. I kissed her right there, in the middle of my networking event, in front of everyone. That was the last time I saw Chloe. I heard through friends that she moved to Denver a few months later. Something about a new job and wanting a fresh start. And I hope she found whatever she was looking for, genuinely. Not because I forgive her, or because I think we could ever be friends. But because holding on to anger would mean she still mattered. And she didn't. What mattered was the woman who'd chosen me without guarantees. Who'd seen me at my worst and decided to stay. Who didn't need me to be successful or healthy or impressive to think I was worth her time. 2 years later, I'm cancer-free, my company is thriving, and Harper and I got engaged last month. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Chloe had stayed, if she'd been strong enough to handle the hard parts. And I realize we still would have ended eventually, because we were fundamentally incompatible. She needed someone who looked good in her story. I needed someone who'd stay when the story got ugly. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about not giving Chloe another chance, if I think I was too harsh or unforgiving. The answer is no. And here's why. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening doors that closed for good reasons. Chloe showed me exactly who she was when life got difficult. When loving me required actual sacrifice instead of just Instagram captions and coffee dates. She made her choice, and I respected it enough not to pretend it didn't happen just because circumstances changed. I survived cancer, built a successful business, and found someone who chose me without needing proof I'd be worth the investment. Chloe wanted back in when the risk was gone, when I was safe again. And that's not love. That's just opportunism dressed up in therapy language and second-chance rhetoric. So, do you think I was wrong for not taking back my ex-girlfriend who left me when I was dying, but wanted me back when I survived and became successful?